Marcus Sullivan, the multimillionaire owner of Sullivan Diamonds, humiliates a scruffy child who breaks into his exclusive Manhattan store. He orders security guards to remove the little beggar until the boy desperately shouts, "I have a letter." When Tommy reveals a DNA test, Marcus discovers the devastating truth. That abandoned child is his own son.
Hello. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. At the end, please rate the story. I will be happy to respond to you in the comments. Now, let's get to the story.
The heels of the Italian genuine leather shoes echoed against the polished marble like a judge's gavel, announcing Marcus Sullivan's arrival even before his imposing silhouette of 1 meter and 85 centimeters crossed the threshold of Sullivan Diamonds. The 45-year-old man wore an Armani suit that cost more than his employees' annual salaries, and his gray eyes scanned every detail of the flagship store with the surgical precision of someone who had built an empire on perfection. The strategically positioned LED lights made the diamonds dance in their climate-controlled showcases, creating a light spectacle that transformed the store into a crystal palace in the heart of Manhattan. Marcus took a deep breath, savoring the subtle scent of French lavender wafting from the hidden diffusers, mixed with the unmistakable aroma of fresh money circulating there daily. "Jennifer." His voice cut through the air with the coldness of a blade, addressing the young saleswoman nervously adjusting a Tahitian pearl necklace. "Those pearls are misaligned by 2 millimeters. A customer paying $50,000 for a piece shouldn't find imperfections." The girl, no more than 25 years old, trembled almost imperceptibly as she corrected the positioning of the jewels. Marcus watched with satisfaction as his words hit deep not out of cruelty, but because excellence was the only language he knew, the only one that had brought him from nothing to the top of the business food chain. His fingers, adorned only with a platinum Ringa wedding band he had worn for 8 years, for reasons he preferred not to revisit, glided over the flawless surface of a showcase containing Swiss watches. Each piece there was worth more than a suburban house, and that reassured him in a nearly primal way. "Mr. Sullivan," approached Timothy, the store manager, a middle-aged man who had learned to always maintain a professional smile while receiving his boss's cutting critiques. September's numbers exceeded expectations by 20%. Marcus did not smile. He rarely smiled. He only nodded, as if success were something inevitable, programmed by the universe's gears to benefit him. And perhaps it really was. Since becoming a widower, since life taught him that only work and money were reliable constants, he had shaped his existence around the cold certainty of numbers and the comforting solidity of luxury. He walked to the large window overlooking Fifth Avenue, observing the steady flow of hurried people, most of them never having enough money to even enter his store. On the other side of the bulletproof glass, a mother held a small child's hand, pointing to the displays with eyes full of impossible dreams. Marcus looked away. Dreams were for people who did not understand that the world operated through well-defined hierarchies, and he had positioned himself comfortably at the top of that pyramid. The store softly buzzed with the discreet murmur of conversations in multiple languages: Arabic, Mandarin, French, Russian, the sound of international money. Ladies with Hermès bags examined tiaras that had once belonged to European royalty, while young heirs chose gifts for lovers they would never truly love. This was his world. Select, exclusive, protected from the imperfections of ordinary life. Here, among the eternal sparkle of diamonds and the precise tick-tock of Swiss chronometers, Marcus Sullivan reigned supreme, lord of an empire built on calculated coldness and the certainty that, in the end, only success truly mattered. The streets of Manhattan swallowed little Tommy's small figure like an ocean of concrete and glass. At 7 years old, the boy seemed even smaller against the skyscrapers rising around him like sleeping giants, their shadows creating a labyrinth of light and darkness on the bustling sidewalks. His thin legs, clad in jeans that had seen better days, walked with a determination that contrasted with his fragile appearance. The faded blue t-shirt hung loosely on his narrow shoulders, and the worn-out sneakers made a muffled sound against the asphalt, almost inaudible amid the constant roar of New York traffic. But it was his eyes that drew attention, green like raw emeralds, shining with an intelligence that seemed too ancient for someone so young. Those eyes watched every street sign, every building number, with the fierce concentration of one carrying an important mission. His right little hand remained buried in his pants pocket, gripping tightly a yellowed envelope that had become his most precious treasure. The paper was soft from constant handling, the edges slightly torn where his nervous fingers had played in recent weeks. Inside it, an address written in the careful handwriting of Sister Catherine, the only person at the orphanage who seemed to truly care about his fate. 5th Avenue, 847, he murmured to himself, like a mantra keeping him focused. The thin voice was lost in the city noise, but he kept repeating the address he had memorized even before he could read properly. It had been only 3 months since he arrived at St. Francis' home. 3 months since his life had completely changed, since he became just another among dozens of children without a family. But Sister Catherine had told him that maybe, just maybe, this address could mean something. She had found the paper among the few belongings that accompanied Tommy to the orphanage, and her kind eyes shone with cautious hope when she showed it to him. "It could be important, my dear," she had whispered, kneeling down to be at the level of the boy's green eyes. "But you must be brave." Brave. Tommy swallowed hard as he stopped in front of an imposing building, his eyes rising to read the golden numbers. 847. His small heart beat like a drum in his skinny chest, and he could feel cold sweat breaking out on his forehead despite the fresh October wind. Sullivan Diamonds stretched before him like a fairy tale palace, but a palace that intimidated rather than enchanted. The display windows shone with an almost magical light, filled with objects that seemed to belong to another world, a world where people like him had no entry. Through the crystal-clear glass, he could see elegant figures moving slowly, their expensive clothes and refined gestures creating a brutal contrast with his unkempt appearance. Tommy wiped his sweaty hands on his pants and carefully took the envelope from his pocket. The yellowed paper trembled slightly between his fingers as he checked the address once again, as if he could have been mistaken, as if that grand place might not be his destiny. A man in a suit hurried past him, speaking loudly on a phone, and Tommy instinctively shrank back. A woman in high heels watched him for a moment with a barely concealed look of disapproval before turning away. The whole world seemed to be telling him he didn't belong there, but Sister Catherine's voice echoed in his mind. "Be brave, Tommy. Sometimes the most important things in life are on the other side of fear." The boy clenched his small fists, feeling his anxiety-bitten nails press against his palms. His green eyes fixed one last time on the envelope, then on the glass door of the store, then back on the yellowed paper that had become his only hope. He took a deep breath, the cold October air filling his thin lungs, and took the first step toward the door, then another, and another, until, with his heart thundering in his chest and his legs trembling like leaves in the wind, Tommy pushed open the heavy glass door of Sullivan Diamonds and entered a world he had never dared to imagine. The scented air of Sullivan Diamonds seemed to solidify the moment Tommy crossed the threshold of the door. The sound of his footsteps on the polished marble echoed like gunshots amidst the refined murmur of conversations, and all heads turned to him with the military precision of a formation of soldiers. Jennifer, the saleswoman whom Marcus had corrected moments before, let out a muffled exclamation. Her eyes widened at the sight of the thin, ill-dressed boy, as if he were an apparition from another universe. Timothy, the manager, discreetly choked on the coffee he was drinking, his cheeks flushing with instant embarrassment. The two store security guards, burly men in black suits who remained strategically positioned on the sides, moved almost imperceptibly, their postures stiffening like compressed springs. The taller one, a man with broad shoulders and a scarred face, whispered something into the small earpiece he wore. Tommy stood still in the center of the store, his green eyes absorbing every detail of the luxurious environment surrounding him. The diamonds looked like stars captured in crystal showcases, and the baccarat crystal chandeliers created dancing rainbows on the walls. It was more beautiful than anything he had seen in his short life, but also infinitely more frightening. An elderly lady, adorned with pearl necklaces worth more than a house, instinctively stepped back, clutching her Chanel purse against her chest as if it were a shield. Her companion, a distinguished gray-haired man, frowned with clear disapproval. "My God," the lady murmured in heavily disdainful French. "What is that child doing here?" It was then that Marcus turned from the window where he had been watching the street activity. His gray eyes narrowed until they became two icy slits as they landed on Tommy's small figure. Blood rushed to his face like erupting lava, and his jaw clenched with a tension that made the veins in his neck stand out. "What the hell?" The words hissed out venomously between his clenched teeth. Marcus crossed the store with long, predatory strides, his Italian shoes hammering the floor with growing fury. Customers instinctively moved away from his path, like animals sensing the approach of a predator. "You!" Marcus's voice exploded through the store like thunder, causing Tommy to take a shaky step back. "What kind of joke is this? How dare you enter my store wearing these rags?" The boy tried to speak, his small hand trembling as it held the yellowed envelope, but the words seemed to have escaped his throat. Marcus drew even closer, his imposing presence casting a threatening shadow over the child. "Are you deaf, you little beggar?" Marcus spat the words with all the venom he could muster. "My store is not a shelter for street brats. You're scaring away my clientele." Tears began to form in Tommy's green eyes, but he held them back with a determination that should not exist in someone so young. Around them, the murmurs of the customers grew like the buzzing of angry bees. "What an outrage," commented a man with a British accent. "How did they let this child in here?" "It's shameful," agreed his wife, shaking her head with theatrical disgust. "Let's go, Charles. I can't shop under these conditions." Marcus felt every customer heading to the exit as a direct blow to his pride and his bank account. The fury swelled until it became a storm in his gray eyes. "Security!" His voice cut through the air like a whip. "Remove that thing from my store. Immediately!" The two men in black approached Tommy like sinister shadows. The boy backed up until his back touched a showcase, the cold glass making him shudder. His desperate eyes searched for an exit, but he was surrounded by hostile faces and palpable disapproval. "Please," Tommy managed to whisper, his thin voice almost inaudible. "I just need—" "You don't need anything here," Marcus roared, bringing his face close to the boy. "Nothing! You're nothing but a little parasite trying to suck up what isn't yours." The taller security guard grabbed Tommy's skinny arm with a force that made the boy emit a moan of pain and surprise. Tears finally overflowed, running down his pale cheeks as he was dragged toward the door like a rag doll. "No, wait!" Tommy struggled, his voice rising in desperation. I have. The second security guard grabbed his other arm, and together they began carrying him through the store. His feet barely touched the ground, and the yellowed envelope swung dangerously in his free hand. The customers watched the scene with a mixture of morbid fascination and relief, like spectators of a traffic accident. But when they were only a few meters from the door, Tommy gathered all the desperate strength he had and twisted violently. His slender frame worked in his favor for a moment that slipped from the guard's hands like a wet fish and staggered backward, gasping and trembling, still clutching the envelope against his chest. "I have a letter," he shouted with all the strength his small lungs could produce, his voice echoing throughout the silent store. "A letter with this address!" The silence that descended over Sullivan Diamonds was so dense it seemed to have its own substance, filling every inch of the luxurious space like an invisible fog. Tommy, still panting from the effort of freeing himself from the security guards, held the yellowed envelope against his chest with both hands as if it were a protective talisman. His little hands trembled violently as he carefully unfolded the paper that had become his only hope. The envelope was damp with nervous sweat, and he needed several attempts to fully open it. The sound of the paper being handled echoed through the silent store like dry leaves in the wind. Marcus remained standing, his breathing heavy and uneven, his fists still clenched at his sides. His gray eyes, still blazing with fury, watched the child's awkward movements with a mixture of impatience and disdain. Around them, customers and employees had turned into statues, all caught in the palpable tension of the moment. I don't know how to read very well yet," Tommy murmured, his voice choked by the tears still streaming down his cheeks. His small fingers traced the paper reverently, looking for familiar words. "But Sister Catherine taught me some important words." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, leaving a shiny mark on his pale skin, and looked directly at Marcus. Those green eyes burned with an intensity that seemed disproportionately old for a 7-year-old child. "Hi, Daddy." The words came out as a whisper, but cut through the air of the store like a sharp blade. The childish voice trembled, but there was a desperate determination behind it. "Mom said you abandoned me." The world seemed to stop. Marcus felt as if he had been struck by lightning, each word from the child echoing in his mind like reverberations in a deep cave. The blood drained from his face, leaving it pale as marble. What did you say? The words came out as a hoarse croak, almost inaudible. Tommy extended the paper with trembling hands, and Marcus took it without awareness of his own movement. His eyes scanned the document, and reality began to unfold before him like a waking nightmare. It was a DNA test. The letters danced before his eyes, but certain words leapt from the page like daggers. 99.9% probability of paternity. Thomas Ryan Sullivan. Elena Catherine Morrison. Elena, his deceased wife's name, burned on his retina like glowing iron. Marcus lifted his eyes from the paper and looked at Tommy, really looked at him for the first time. And it was as if he had been hit by a second lightning bolt, even more devastating than the first. The eyes. Those green eyes were unmistakable. They had exactly the same emerald shade he had fallen in love with many years ago. The same almond shape, the same long dark lashes, the same hypnotic depth that had enchanted him since the first meeting with Elena. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking like glass. "No, this can't be." But his brain was already making the cruel connections, the dates on the document. Tommy had been born on the 15th of March, exactly the same day Elena died. The same day he had lost not only his wife, but also. She was pregnant, he muttered to himself, the words coming out like a confession torn from him. Elena was pregnant, and I didn't know. The memory hit him like an avalanche. Elena trying to tell him something on that last morning, her eyes shining with a secret she wanted to share. But he had rushed out to an important meeting, kissing her quickly and promising they would talk that night. A night that never came. Tommy's nose. Now that he paid attention, he could see the Sullivan family traits, the same chin shape, the same curve of the eyebrows. How had he not noticed before? "You are." Marcus's voice failed completely. His legs began to tremble, and he felt the world spin around him. Tommy nodded shyly, wiping more tears from his face. "Mom left me with her sister when I was born. Aunt Sarah took care of me until she got sick too." Marcus's legs gave way like snapping twigs. He dropped to his knees on the cold marble floor, the DNA test trembling in his hands like a leaf in a storm. The sound of his knees hitting the floor echoed through the silent store like gunshots. The ruthless CEO, the man who had built an empire through calculated coldness and fierce determination, was broken. Before him was his son he had never known existed. The son who had grown up in orphanages while he amassed fortunes. The son he had just publicly humiliated for being a beggar from the streets. "My God," he sighed, the words coming out like a broken prayer. "What have I done?" The cold marble seeped through the expensive fabric of Marcus's pants, but he barely registered the physical discomfort. His mind was being torn apart by memories he had buried so deeply he thought they would never resurface. The DNA test trembled between his fingers like an autumn leaf about to be carried away by the wind, but the words remained etched in his retina like scars. Tears began welling up in his gray eyes, the first in 8 years. They fell onto the paper, slightly smudging the ink but failing to erase the raw truth before him. Tommy stood there, his thin arms hanging at his sides, watching that powerful man completely break down. "Elena?" Marcus murmured the name like a broken prayer. And suddenly the memory of that terrible night flooded back like water breaking a dam. The hospital. The cruel fluorescent lights shining over him as he waited in the sterile corridors. The doctor approaching with a grave expression, his words echoing like death sentences. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm sorry to inform you that your wife did not survive the complications of childbirth." Marcus had collapsed at that moment, his pain so overwhelming that it blocked out everything else. He had refused to hear further details, rejected any talk of children or births. His Elena was dead, nothing else mattered. Nothing else could matter. There were 2 babies, he now whispered, the words coming out like confessions ripped from his gut. "Twins. The doctor tried to tell me, but I couldn't hear. I couldn't bear it." The memory cruelly unfolded before him. He had fled the hospital that night, leaving all the papers and responsibilities to the lawyers. He had ordered that no one ever speak to him about that night again. The baby, he knew there was a baby, but he couldn't bear the idea of looking at a child who had cost Elena her life. "I abandoned you." The words came out like glass cutting his throat. "My own son, and I abandoned you." Tommy took a hesitant step toward the kneeling man. His voice came small and shaky. "Aunt Sarah said you didn't want me." that you chose not to know me." Each word was a stab to Marcus's already torn heart. Sarah, he vaguely remembered Elena's younger sister, a kind woman who had attended the funeral. She must have taken the babies when he abandoned them to their fate. No. Marcus shook his head violently, tears now freely falling. It wasn't like that. I was shattered, lost. When your mother died, I died with her. I couldn't see beyond my own pain. The silence in the shop was so deep that the sound of Marcus's heavy breathing echoed like waves breaking on the shore. The customers watched the scene with a mixture of morbid fascination and awkward discomfort. Jennifer had brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Timothy remained motionless, his face pale as paper. Marcus slowly raised his eyes to meet Tommy's face. They were Elena's eyes looking at him, but so young, so vulnerable, carrying a sadness no child should know. The shape of the nose was his, the curve of the forehead belonged to the Sullivan lineage, but those eyes were pure, Elena. "You have your mother's eyes," he murmured, his voice choked. "She had the most beautiful eyes in the world." Tommy blinked, and a solitary tear ran down his cheek. "Sister Catherine said she's an angel now." The pain that pierced Marcus's chest was so intense he gasped. He extended trembling hands toward the boy, hesitant, as if approaching something sacred and fragile. Can I hold you?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "Please?" Tommy hesitated for a moment, his green eyes studying the shattered face of the man kneeling before him. Then, with the inexplicable trust only children possess, he stepped forward. Marcus wrapped him in his arms, and it was like holding a wounded bird. Tommy was so thin, so fragile, that Marcus could feel every rib, every protruding bone through the faded t-shirt. The boy's scent was a mix of cheap soap and something indefinably sweet that recalled lost innocence. "Forgive me," Marcus whispered into the small ear, his voice completely cracking. "Forgive me, my son. Forgive me for not being there. Forgive me for abandoning you. Forgive me for not being the father you deserved." Tommy remained stiff for a moment, then his thin arms closed around Marcus's neck with surprising strength. It was as if he was clinging to a lifeline after years of drowning. "I dreamed about you," Tommy murmured against Marcus's shoulder. "Every night, I dreamed you'd come find me." The words shattered what was left of Marcus's heart. He squeezed the boy tighter, feeling tears wetting the fabric of his expensive shirt. Around them, the whispers of the customers grew louder, but Marcus no longer cared. Nothing else mattered except the fragile child in his arms. Slowly, Marcus rose, carrying Tommy as if he weighed less than a feather. The boy nestled against his chest, his green eyes closing for the first time in months with a feeling of safety. "Let's go home," Marcus murmured, his voice still shaky but filled with a new determination. "Let's go home, my son." He walked through the shop toward the exit, his steps steady despite the tears still streaming down his face. The customers stepped aside, some whispering among themselves, others watching in respectful silence. Jennifer had tears in her eyes, and Timothy kept his head bowed. Marcus didn't look at any of them. In that moment, his world had shrunk to the precious weight of the child in his arms, and the silent promise he made. He would never again let his son feel abandoned. Never again. The Sullivan mansion stood like a stone palace on the Upper East Side, its Georgian windows reflecting the last rays of the October sun. Marcus climbed the marble steps carrying Tommy, who had fallen asleep in his arms during the silent ride in the Bentley. The child's weight felt insignificant against his chest, but carried the overwhelming burden of 8 years of guilt and regret. The mahogany door opened before Marcus even reached it. Margaret, his housekeeper of 15 years, appeared on the threshold with a look of surprise etched on her face. Her kind eyes widened at the sight of the child in her employer's arms, but the 60-year-old woman had learned not to ask questions when she saw tears in Marcus's eyes. "Prepare the blue room," Marcus murmured, his voice still hoarse with emotion. "And call Dr. Henderson." Discreetly. Marcus's footsteps echoed through the corridors lined with Renaissance art, passing through halls that had not heard children's laughter in decades. Tommy shifted slightly in his arms as they reached the guest room, a space decorated in royal blue tones, with a 4-poster bed that looked like a ship sailing on a sea of Persian rugs. Marcus laid the boy carefully on the silk comforter. Tommy woke slowly, his green eyes opening with the typical confusion of someone awakening in an unfamiliar place. For a moment, panic flashed across his face before memory returned. "Where are we?" Tommy asked, sitting up and gazing at the luxurious room in amazement. His small hands touched the soft fabric of the comforter, as if he had never felt anything so smooth before. "At home," Marcus replied, sitting on the edge of the bed with careful movements. "This is your home now, Tommy." The boy looked at him with those penetrating eyes that were perfect reflections of Elena's. "For how long?" The simple question cut Marcus like a blade. The child had already learned that nothing was permanent, that homes were temporary, that adults made promises they didn't keep. "Forever," Marcus said, his voice filled with fierce conviction. "I will never leave you again, Tommy. Never again." Tommy lowered his gaze, his fingers nervously fidgeting with the hem of his worn-out t-shirt. "People always say that at the beginning." The words struck Marcus like fists in the stomach. He leaned forward, trying to capture the boy's elusive gaze. "What people, Tommy? Tell me about your life before the orphanage." Tommy's initial resistance was almost palpable. His shoulders stiffened, and he shrank slightly, like a wounded animal bracing for another blow. But there was something in Marcus's voice, a gentleness he rarely used with adults that slowly dissolved his defenses. "First it was the Morrisons," Tommy began, his voice so low Marcus had to lean in to hear. "They said they wanted me because I looked like Mom, but they only wanted the government money." The words came out slowly, like blood oozing from an old wound. Tommy spoke of nights locked in a dark basement for bothering the Morrisons during dinner, of meals withheld as punishment for whining, of the overwhelming loneliness of sleeping on a moldy mattress on the floor, hearing the real family's laughter from above. "Then it was the Hartwells," Tommy continued, his voice growing even more distant. "Mr. Hartwell drank a lot. When he drank, he got angry. He said I was a useless mouth to feed." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, nails digging into his palms. The rage grew in his chest, like lava rising in a volcano, but he held it back. Tommy needed to speak, to release the poison that had built up in his small soul. "Did he hurt you?" Marcus asked, though he feared the answer. Tommy nodded almost imperceptibly. "When I couldn't do the chores right, or when I cried too much, or just because." The boy's voice broke, and he wiped his nose with the back of his hand. Marcus wanted to hold him again, but felt Tommy wasn't ready yet. The boy needed to tell his story at his own pace. "There were many homes," Tommy continued. "The Jenkins, who locked me in the garage when they had important visitors. The Watsons, who made me eat food scraps off the floor like I was a dog. Mrs. Foster, who said I was cursed because my mother died." Each name was like a death sentence being read aloud. Marcus felt his heart shatter into smaller pieces with every revelation. This was his Sonhe's very flesh and blood enduring unspeakable horrors while he amassed fortunes and drowned in self-pity. "How did you get the DNA test?" Marcus asked when Tommy paused. The boy's eyes lit up slightly for the first time. "Aunt Sarah gave it to me before she got very sick. She said it was my right to know who my father was. She taught me to keep it safe." Tommy stood up from the bed and walked over to where he had left his few possessions, a small, torn backpack that contained his whole life. Reverently, he took out a dented cookie tin. Inside, carefully wrapped in plastic, was the DNA test, along with a faded photograph. "I looked at your picture every night," Tommy said, handing the photo to Marcus, "and dreamed that one day you would come for me, that you'd tell me it had all been a mistake." Marcus took the photo with trembling hands. It was an image of him and Elena on their honeymoon in Tuscany, both smiling radiantly under the Italian sun. Elena looked stunning in a flowing white dress, and Marcus seemed years younger, his eyes shining with a happiness he had forgotten he once possessed. "She's beautiful," Tommy said shyly. "Do I look like her?" "You look just like her," Marcus whispered, his voice choked. "And she was the most beautiful person who ever lived." Tommy smiled for the first time since Marcus had met him, a small, hesitant but genuine smile. However, when he turned to put the photo away, his shirt lifted slightly. Marcus saw the scars. They were old marks, some faded to white with time, others still pink. An irregular line on his back looked like it had been made by a belt. Small circular marks on his arms that could have been from cigarettes. A crescent-shaped scar on his shoulder that Marcus couldn't even imagine how it had been caused. The world seemed to stop. Marcus felt as if he had been punched in the stomach, all the air leaving his lungs at once. His Sanhees, small, brave boy, had been tortured, marked, broken by people who should have protected him. And all because he, Marcus Sullivan, had been too cowardly to face his own pain. "Tommy," his voice came out as a broken whisper. "Come here, son." This time, when Marcus opened his arms, Tommy ran into them without hesitation. And when Marcus held him, it was with a silent promise that he would spend the rest of his life making up for every tear, every scar, every lonely night his son had endured alone. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the silk curtains of the blue room as Marcus gently pushed open the ajar door. It was his first morning in a row making the same silent check, driven by a primitive need to make sure Tommy was still there, that it had not been just a cruel dream. The boy slept, curled up in a small ball in the center of the immense bed, occupying only a fraction of the available space. Even in sleep, his small fists remained clenched, as if ready to defend himself at any moment. Marcus noticed how Tommy had pushed all the soft pillows away, preferring to lay his head directly on the sheet, a habit acquired from years of sleeping on hard surfaces. "Good morning," Marcus murmured softly as he saw Tommy's green eyes slowly open. The boy sat up immediately, alert like a wild animal, his eyes scanning the luxurious room as if remembering where he was. "Did you sleep well?" Marcus asked, keeping his distance so as not to scare the child. Tommy nodded hesitantly, but Marcus could see the dark circles under his eyes. During the night, he had heard muffled screams coming from the room, nightmares that made the boy wake up in panic, looking for exits or places to hide. "Margaret made breakfast," Marcus offered with a smile that still looked awkward on his normally serious face. "Pancakes. Do you like pancakes?" Tommy's gaze lit up momentarily, but then became cautious again. Can I really eat all that I want?" The simple question cut Marcus like glass. "Of course you can. You can eat all you want, whenever you want. This is your home now." In the dining room, Marcus watched fascinated and horrified as Tommy ate. The boy chewed slowly, savoring every bite as if it were the last meal of his life. When Marcus got up to fetch more juice, Tommy quickly wrapped his arms around the plate, protecting the food by instinct. "No one is going to steal your food," Marcus said gently, sitting down again. "Never again." Over the following days, Marcus discovered that regaining a child's trust was infinitely more complex than any business he had ever conducted. Tommy jumped at every sudden movement, shrank when voices rose, and seemed constantly surprised when Marcus kept small promises, like buying a toy or letting him choose what to watch on television. One afternoon, he found Tommy in the office, watching with fascination the books that covered the walls from floor to ceiling. The boy had pushed a chair to reach a high shelf and was gently leafing through a world atlas. "Do you like books?" Marcus asked, sitting beside him. "I want to learn to read properly," Tommy confessed, his voice heavy with shame. "At school, the other kids laughed at me because I couldn't read the big words." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "What school did you go to?" "Many different ones," Tommy shrugged. "Whenever I moved houses, I changed schools too. Sometimes the foster parents didn't even take me. They said it was a waste of time." That night, Marcus stayed up late researching on the computer. The numbers he found made him sick. Hundreds of thousands of children in the foster system. Brutal statistics about abuse, neglect, children aging out of the system without ever finding a true family. Each number represented a life like Tommy's, a child who had been abandoned, hurt, forgotten. "Dr. Henderson," Marcus said on the phone the next morning, his voice still hoarse from a sleepless night. "I need you to come examine my son." Discreetly. The word son came naturally from his lips, as if it had always belonged there. The family doctor arrived 2 hours later, a kind man with gray hair who had cared for Marcus for years. His exam revealed chronic malnutrition, stunted growth, and scars that spoke of years of systematic abuse. "He will need intensive nutritional follow-up, doctor," Henderson explained in a low voice while Tommy played in the next room. "And specialized psychological therapy. The trauma this child suffered. Marcus, it will take a long time for him to feel truly safe." Marcus nodded, absorbing every word. "Money is no object. I want the best for him. The best doctors, the best therapists, the best tutors. It's not just about money, the doctor warned him. He needs consistency, predictability, a father who is present, not just rich. In the following days, Marcus canceled important meetings for the first time in years. He hired Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist specialized in trauma, who started weekly visits. Professor Williams, a gentle and patient tutor, began coming daily to help Tommy with reading and basic math. But it was the small and intimate moments that revealed the depth of Tommy's wound. Like when Marcus found him looking out the bedroom window, watching a family walking down the street with fascination. "They look happy," Tommy noted with a sadness too old for his 7 years. "Would you like to have a family like that?" Marcus asked, sitting next to him on the windowsill. "I dream about it sometimes," Tommy admitted. "To have a mom and a dad who really love me. To go to school every day to the same school. To have real friends. Maybe to have a dog." Each dream was so simple, so basic, that Marcus felt tears burn in his eyes. His son did not dream of wealth or luxuries. He only dreamed of normalcy, of love, of stability. "What else would you like?" Marcus asked softly. Tommy was silent for a long moment, then whispered, "I'd like to have a picture of us together. To prove you're real. To prove that I have a real dad." That night, after Tommy finally fell asleep, still curled up defensively, but this time clutching a teddy bear Marcus had bought, Marcus remained seated in the chair beside the bed, watching his son, his responsibility, his chance for redemption. For the first time in 8 years, Marcus Sullivan had something more important than money or power. He had a reason to be better, to grow beyond his own limitations, to learn to love unconditionally. And for the first time since Elena's death, Marcus felt truly alive again. Scared, guilty, overwhelmed, but alive. The boy in the crib stirred slightly, murmured something incomprehensible in his sleep, and Marcus instinctively reached out his hand to touch his forehead, checking for a fever. It was such a natural, so paternal a gesture that it surprised him. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could learn to be the father Tommy deserved. The executive meeting room at Sullivan Enterprises had never witnessed such a heavy silence. The air seemed charged with electricity as Marcus adjusted his shirt cuffs, his gray eyes scanning the perplexed faces of the most powerful men in his business circle. Charles Whitmore, his chief lawyer for 15 years, nervously drummed his fingers on the polished mahogany table. Beside him, 3 founding partners of the companymen who had sweat and bled to build the Sullivan Empire exchanged looks of disbelief. Robert Chen, the chief accountant, held a stack of documents with trembling hands, as if bearing a death sentence. "Gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade, "you must be wondering why I've called this emergency meeting." The sound of Charles's pen scratching paper echoed through the room as he scribbled nervous notes. "Marcus, I hope it's to tell us you've reconsidered this madness." Marcus stood, walking to the panoramic window that offered a majestic view of Manhattan. Below, traffic flowed like blood through the city's arteries, and somewhere in this concrete jungle, thousands of children like Tommy lost, abandoned, forgotten existed. "I won't reconsider," Marcus declared, his voice carrying a determination that made the men around the table straighten up. "I am going to sell 50% of my shares in Sullivan Enterprises." The uproar of protests was immediate. Charles jumped out of his chair as if electrocuted. "Marcus, you've lost your mind. This is corporate suicide." 15 years building this empire, exploded Richard Morrison, one of the partners, his face reddening with indignation. 15 years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, calculated risks, and you want to throw it all away for a child? Marcus turned slowly, his eyes radiating a coldness that made the men instinctively recoil. "That child is my son." Silence returned, heavier than before. Robert Chen swallowed nervously, adjusting his glasses with trembling hands. "Marcus, even if he is your son, you can't make business decisions based on emotions. The market can go to hell," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "Want to know what I discovered these past weeks?" He moved closer to the table, his hands resting on the polished surface as he leaned forward. "While I was building this empire, accumulating fortunes, and worrying about stock prices. My son was being beaten, humiliated, tortured by people who were supposed to protect him. Charles tried to intercede. Marcus, you can't blame yourself for something you didn't know. I knew, Marcus roared, pounding the table hard enough to make the glasses of water dance. I knew there was a baby. I knew and chose not to know. I chose my pain, my grief, my self-pity, instead of looking for my own son. Robert cleared his throat nervously. But Marcus, donating that amount, we're talking about nearly $300 million. It's an irreversible decision. $300 million, Marcus repeated, his voice dripping with bitter irony. Do you know how much it costs to save an 8-year-old child from suffering? Not a cent. It only cost me to stop being a coward long enough to open my door. He walked to a second table where charts, statistics, and documents he had compiled in recent weeks were spread out. There are 400,000 children in the American foster care system. 400,000. 25,000 age out of the system every year without ever finding a family. 25,000 Tommies. His voice grew more intense, more passionate as he continued. 80% of prisoners pass through the foster care system. 50% of homeless children are former residents of orphanages. These aren't just statistics, they are lives destroyed because people like me think their problems are more important. Charles tried a more diplomatic approach. Marcus, no one is questioning your intention, but you can help these children without destroying the company. We can establish charity programs, create charity programs. Marcus cut him off with disdain. Scraps. Social events where rich people feel good about themselves donating what they spend on a bottle of wine. He turned to face each man individually. I want to reform entire orphanages. I want to create centers of excellence for childcare. I want to establish educational funds that guarantee no orphan child drops out of school for lack of money. Robert desperately flipped through his documents. Marcus, even with $300 million, you can't solve a national systemic problem. I can't solve everything, Marcus agreed. But I can start. I can create a model for others to follow. I can prove that investing in abandoned children is not only morally right, it's economically smart. He grabbed a thick folder from the table and threw it down in front of the men. I studied every detail. Simplified adoption programs that reduce waiting times from years to months. Transitional homes that prepare teenagers for adult life. Mentoring programs that connect orphan children with volunteer families. Charles opened the folder, his eyes widening as he read. Marcus, this is a full business plan. Because it is a business, Marcus replied. The business of saving lives. The business of fixing a broken system. The business of ensuring no child goes through what Tommy went through. Richard Morrison shook his head. Still, Marcus, you're talking about giving up 50% of everything we've built. That I built, Marcus corrected him, his voice icy. And built on the backs of children like my son. Every dollar I earned while Tommy suffered is a dollar stained with blood on my hands. Robert tried another approach. Marcus, think about the future. Think about Tommy. Without this fortune, what will you leave him? Marcus smiled for the first time since the meeting began, a sad but determined smile. I will leave something far more valuable than money. I will leave a world where children like him have a real chance at happiness. He walked back to his chair, where a gold Mont Blanc pen waited next to the transfer documents. I will leave the example that it is never too late to do the right thing. Marcus, Charles made a last attempt, his voice almost pleading. At least wait a few months. Think it over. Talk to more experts. I've thought for 8 years, Marcus replied, picking up the pen. 8 years of selfishness. 8 years of refusing to face the truth about what my cowardice cost. The pen touched the paper, and the sound of ink flowing was like thunder in the silent room. 1 signature. 2. 3. Each stroke represented millions of dollars being transferred from personal accounts to charity funds. It's done, Marcus declared, putting the pen back on the table. The Elena and Thomas Sullivan Foundation is officially established with an initial fund of $300 million. The men around the table remained frozen, staring at the signed document as if it were a death sentence. To them, perhaps it was. Their personal fortunes, based on shares of Sullivan Enterprises, had just been drastically devalued. But Marcus felt no remorse. For the first time in 8 years, he felt whole. He felt he had honored Elena's memory and, more importantly, taken the first step to honor Tommy's trust. "The meeting is adjourned," he announced, heading for the door. "I have dinner with my son." As he walked down the hall toward the elevator, Marcus could hear the outraged murmurs echoing through the meeting room. He didn't care. For the first time in his adult life, something was more important than the approval of other rich men. He had a son waiting at home. And finally, he had something of real value to offer him. The New York autumn had a golden quality that November day, as if the very sunlight approved the transformation that was about to be unveiled. The Bentley glided silently through the streets of Queens, carrying Marcus and Tommy toward the place that had been both home and nightmare for so many little dreamers. Tommy looked different. In 2 months, living in the Sullivan mansion, he had gained enough weight for his pale cheeks to regain a slight rosy flush. The navy suit he wore, tailored but not ostentatious, fit perfectly over his shoulders, which no longer seemed so fragile. More important than the physical transformation, his green eyes shone with a confidence growing day by day. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marcus asked, watching Tommy's fingers nervously fidgeting with the small tie. "We don't have to go in if you don't want to." Tommy took a deep breath, the cold November air creating a small cloud before his lips. "I want to show them that someone can truly care." The simple phrase cut Marcus's heart with its depth. In such a short time, his son had demonstrated an emotional wisdom that Marcus himself had taken decades to begin understanding. The old St. Francis home was unrecognizable. Where there had been peeling walls and cracked windows, now stood a renovated facade in warm earth tones and brick red. Landscape gardens had been planted around the building, and a brand new playground gleamed in the sun, its colorful equipment catching any child's eye. "My God," whispered Tommy, pressing his face against the car window. "Is it really the same place?" Marcus felt a lump in his throat. "Do you recognize it? The tree." Tommy pointed to an ancient oak that had survived the renovation. "I used to sit under it when I was sad. It was the only place I felt safe." Sister Catherine waited for them at the main gate, her usually serene face shining with tears of joy. The 60-year-old nun had witnessed so many departures and arrivals, so many hopes dashed, that this transformation seemed like a miracle answering decades of prayers. "Tommy, my dear boy," she murmured, kneeling to embrace the child. "Look how you've grown." "Sister Catherine," Tommy returned the hug with genuine affection. Daddy did all this for the other children. The word daddy still caused a sweet tightness in Marcus's chest every time he heard it. He extended his hand to the sister, who squeezed it with surprising strength. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice choked. "There are not enough words to express." "No need," Marcus interrupted gently. "This is the least I could do." When they entered the building, the transformation was even more impressive. The dark, moldy corridors had become airy spaces with abundant natural light. The old peeling walls now displayed colorful murals painted by local artists, depicting fantastical landscapes and fairy tale characters. The dining hall, once a gloomy room with cold metal tables, had been turned into a cozy environment with light wood furniture and a fully equipped kitchen where the aroma of fresh bread floated in the air. The children didn't believe it when the renovations started, Sister Catherine explained as they walked. "Many thought it would be temporary, that we would soon go back to how it was before." It was in the recreation room that the magic truly happened. 23 children of varying ages were playing with new toys, reading colorful books, or drawing at art tables. The room buzzed with the most beautiful sound in the world, genuine children's laughter. "It's Tommy!" screamed a girl with curly hair who couldn't have been more than 5. "Tommy's back." Recognition spread through the room like waves on a lake. Children dropped their activities and ran toward Tommy, their faces lit with the joy of reunion. Marcus watched, fascinated, as his son was enveloped by enthusiastic hugs. "Tommy, you look so different," exclaimed Miguel, a 9-year-old boy Marcus remembered seeing in the orphanage photos. "You seem happy?" "I am happy," Tommy replied, his voice clear and confident. "I found my dad." The children's eyes turned to Marcus with a mix of curiosity and admiration. He knelt down to their level, feeling a nervousness he had never experienced in any boardroom. "Hello," he said simply, his voice softer than usual. "Are you really Tommy's dad?" asked a girl with dark hair and big eyes. "Yes," Marcus answered. "And he told me all about you." "Is it true you made the orphanage beautiful?" asked another boy, his eyes shining with hope. Marcus nodded, feeling tears threaten to fall. "You deserve beautiful things. You deserve to feel at home." Sister Catherine stepped forward. "Children, Mr. Sullivan has some news to share with us." Marcus stood up, discreetly wiping his eyes. "From today, each of you will have access to private tutors to help with your studies. You will have 3 nutritious meals a day, plus healthy snacks whenever you want." Excited murmurs grew as he continued. "There will be a doctor who comes every week to take care of your health, and a kind psychologist named Dr. Sarah will come to talk to anyone who wants whenever you need. You will have music, art, and sports classes," Tommy added, clearly proud. "And a library just for you." Then a very small girl, no older than 4, timidly approached Marcus. Her big eyes were full of tears, but tears of joy. "Sir," she whispered, extending her small arms, "are you our angel?" Marcus knelt again, and the girl threw herself into his arms. The emotional impact was overwhelming. For the first time in his life, Marcus truly understood what it meant to be needed not for his wealth or power, but for his humanity. "I'm not an angel," he whispered against the silky hair of the child. "I'm just someone who should have done this a long time ago." One by one, the other children approached. Soon, Marcus found himself surrounded by small bodies hugging him, children's voices whispering, "Thank you," and "You are our hero." He looked over their heads and found Tommy's gaze. His son smiled, not the hesitant smile of the first days, but a radiant smile that completely transformed his face. In Tommy's green eyes, Marcus saw something no business acquisition had ever provided: genuine paternal pride. "Daddy." Tommy came closer, his small hand finding Marcus's. "You really did it, didn't you? You made things better." Marcus squeezed his son's hand, feeling a strength that before only diamonds and gold had provided. But this was different. This strength was based on something eternal, something that would grow instead of deteriorate over time. "We did this," Marcus corrected. "You showed me what really matters." As he watched the children explore their new facilities, running through the sunlit corridors and laughing in the renovated gardens, Marcus understood a fundamental truth that had escaped his awareness for 45 years. Success was not measured in bank figures or accumulated properties. Success was the sound of 23 orphaned children genuinely laughing for the first time in their lives. It was knowing that when they went to sleep that night, it would be in comfortable beds, with satisfied stomachs and hearts full of hope. And most important, it was having a son by his side who called him Daddy with true love, not out of obligation or interest, but because Marcus had finally learned to deserve the title. All his life, he had pursued profit. Now, at last, he had found a purpose worth more than any fortune, using his wealth to multiply happiness rather than simply accumulate it. It was, Marcus realized as he watched Tommy playing with his former orphanage companions, the best investment he had ever made. The garden of St. Andrew Preparatory School echoed with the sound of children playing during recess as Marcus parked the Bentley under the shade of a century-old oak tree. For an entire year, he had made that same trip 3 times a week to pick up Tommy from school, but the joy he felt seeing his son's face never diminished. Tommy ran out of the red brick building, his blue backpack bouncing on his back, followed by 2 classmates who laughed loudly at some inside joke. At 8 years old, he had become a completely different child. The formerly hollow cheeks were now rosy and full. His green eyes sparkled with liveliness. And when he smiled, which happened often, it was as if the sun had come out on a cloudy morning. "Dad!" Tommy shouted, running toward the car. The word came naturally now, without hesitation or fear. Marcus got out to hug him, feeling how much the boy had grown in recent months. Tommy now reached his chest, and his muscles, previously non-existent, showed the health of a well-fed and active child. "How was the math test?" Marcus asked as Tommy threw his backpack onto the back seat. "I think I did well," Tommy replied, his eyes dancing with excitement. "Remember the fractions you taught me?" 3 questions about them appeared. The pride Marcus felt was almost overwhelming. At the same time, the previous year, Tommy could barely read simple words. Now he was exceeding academic expectations for his age. and more importantly, had developed a genuine passion for learning. And guess what? Tommy continued as Marcus drove through the tree-lined streets of the Upper East Side. Mrs. Henderson said my essay about my hero was one of the best in the class. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Who did you write about? Tommy looked at him with those green eyes, so much like Elena's. About you, of course. I wrote how you saved not only me, but hundreds of other children, too. Tommy's words were no exaggeration. In the 12 months since the reopening of the renewed St. Francis home, the Elena and Thomas Sullivan Foundation had expanded to 17 cities. More than 400 orphan children had been directly benefited by the programs, and adoption rates in the served areas had increased by an impressive 60%. What Marcus had not expected was how his initiative would inspire others. Charles Morrison, the oil billionaire, had established a similar fund focused on education. The Rothschild family launched an international transitional housing program. Even commercial competitors had joined the movement, turning childcare into a cause célèbre among the American elite. Daddy, Tommy said while they waited in traffic, do you remember that today is Mom's death anniversary? Marcus nodded, his heart tightening with a pain that was now more sweet than bitter. That's why we're going to visit her today. Woodlawn Cemetery was serene on that golden March afternoon. Marcus and Tommy walked across the immaculate lawn, passing elaborately carved marble and granite monuments until they reached the simple yet elegant grave where Elena rested. The white marble headstone bore only the essentials. Elena Catherine Sullivan, beloved wife and mother. Love is eternal. Marcus had ordered the addition of "and mother" the previous year, a painful but necessary correction. Tommy placed a bouquet of yellow tulips, Elena's favorite, on the grave as Marcus knelt on the soft grass. "Hi, Mom," Tommy whispered, his voice carrying a naturalness that deeply touched Marcus. "I brought Dad so you can really meet him this time." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the soft March breeze move his tears along his temples. "Elena," he murmured, "I found our son. I found our brave and beautiful boy, and he saved me as much as I saved him." The peace Marcus felt now was something he thought would never be possible. For 8 years he had carried guilt, anger, and a pain seemingly destined to consume him. But Tommy had given him something greater than forgiveness. He had given him purpose. "I wish you could see him," Marcus continued, his hand resting on Tommy's slender shoulder. "He is as smart as you, as brave as you, and has your generous heart. He makes me want to be a better man every day." Tommy knelt beside Marcus, his little hands joined in silent prayer. They stayed that way for several minutes, father and son connected by the memory of the woman who had made them family. As they began walking back to the car, Tommy suddenly stopped. "Dad?" "Yes." Can I just call you Dad?" The words came hesitantly, filled with a vulnerability that made Marcus's heart race. Not Daddy like a little boy, but real Dad? Marcus stopped, kneeling on the grass to meet Tommy's eyes. Tears came instantly, streaming freely down his face as he held the boy's small hands. "Tommy?" His voice choked with emotion. "You have always been my son, from the moment you were born, even when I was too cowardly to admit it. And I have always been your dad, even when I didn't deserve to be." Tommy smiled through his own tears. "So we're really family now?" "We are really family forever," Marcus confirmed, hugging him with all the strength of his love. "Forever and ever." 6 months later, Marcus and Tommy sat in the mansion's library, surrounded by architectural plans and financial reports. Spread across the mahogany table were the most ambitious projects of the Elena and Thomas Sullivan Foundation to date. "So," Tommy said, studying a map with the seriousness of a miniature executive, "if we build the community center here in Detroit, how many children can we serve?" Marcus smiled, still amazed at how his son had developed a genuine passion for philanthropy. "About 200 families directly, but the indirect impact could reach thousands." "And this program in Los Angeles?" Tommy pointed to another document. "Transitional homes for teenagers aging out of the system. We'll teach them professional skills, help them with higher education." "Like you did with me," Tommy interrupted. "But for older kids." "Exactly like I did with you." Tommy leaned over the table, his green eyes shining with determination. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to continue this work. I want no child to feel like they have no place in the world." Marcus felt the familiar lump in his throat. "And you will do that, my son. You will do that, and much more." As they worked together, passing documents and discussing details, Marcus reflected on how much his life had completely changed. A year and a half ago, his greatest pleasure was seeing numbers grow in bank accounts. Now, his greatest joy was sharing dinner with Tommy, helping him with homework, or simply hearing him laugh. The Sullivan Empire still prospered, even with reduced shares. But now Marcus worked with a purpose greater than profit, worked to create a world where children like Tommy would never be abandoned, forgotten, or mistreated. "Dad," Tommy said, raising his eyes from the documents. "Yes? Can I ask you a serious question?" Marcus nodded, intrigued by the sudden solemnity in the boy's tone. "Do you ever regret it? Selling half the company to find me and help other children?" Marcus stopped what he was doing, looking directly into his son's eyes. "Tommy, money can buy many things. It can buy houses, cars, jewelry, power. But do you know what it can't buy?" Tommy shook his head. "It can't buy the sound of your laughter. It can't buy the pride I feel when you get good grades. It can't buy the peace I have every night knowing you're safe next door in your room." Marcus reached out and touched Tommy's face gently. "And it can't buy back the years we lost together. But it can, however, ensure that other parents and children don't lose those years." Tommy smiled, returning to the documents with renewed enthusiasm. "So, we're going to save more families?" "We're going to save more families," Marcus confirmed. As they continued planning the foundation's future, the sun began setting through the library windows, painting the room in golden hues. Marcus looked at his son. His true heir, not of fortunes but of values, and knew he had finally found the legacy that truly mattered. He would not be remembered merely as a successful CEO or a wealthy man. He would be remembered as a father who learned that life's greatest investment was not in diamonds or gold, but in the future of children, starting with the most precious of all, whom he now proudly called son. And as Tommy scribbled enthusiastic notes in the margins of the reports, planning ways to make a difference in the world, Marcus knew Elena was smiling somewhere, proud of the two men she had left to care for one another. The Sullivan legacy would continue. But now, it would be a legacy of love, not profit. An empire built on hope, not power. And led by a partnership between father and son that no force on earth could break.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to keep watching.